She laughed in my face, right there, in front of everyone. "Are you really running that company?" she sneered, fingers tapping the glossy table like it was a joke. I didn't flinch, because one word from me would shut down a $2.6 billion deal and rewrite the rules forever. Welcome to Tales by Ezra. Let's uncover what really happened. I stepped into the towering glass building, the sharp click of my heels against the marble floor echoing like a countdown. The lobby's polished walls reflected my determined face, calm, confident, unshaken. This wasn't just another meeting. This was the moment Morgan Tech would leap from a rising star to an unshakable titan in the tech world. The boardroom door loomed ahead, its sleek frame a gateway to a high-stakes showdown. My team was already seated, a mix of brilliant minds and trusted allies, their eyes steady with quiet assurance. I took a breath, adjusted the navy blazer that hugged my frame like armor, and stepped inside. The room was vast, filled with the hum of whispered conversations and the faint scent of polished wood and expensive coffee. At the head of the table sat the rival CEO, a woman whose reputation preceded her, the kind of power that demanded respect but rarely earned it. Today, she wore a cool smile, the kind that barely hid disdain. As I took my seat opposite her, I felt the weight of every gaze in the room. Investors, partners, board members, all silently judging, calculating, measuring. To them, this was more than a deal. It was a test. Could a black woman lead a multi-billion-dollar merger with poise and precision? I didn't flinch, because I wasn't here to prove them right or wrong. I was here to make history. The presentation began with the usual polished slides, numbers, projections, the language of ambition and power. But beneath the surface, I sensed the undercurrent, the subtle skepticism, the unspoken doubts. I glanced at the rival CEO. Her eyes flickered with a challenge, a silent warning. But I had learned long ago that the fiercest battles are won not with noise, but with quiet confidence and unyielding resolve. Today, I would show them all what leadership truly looked like. The moment the rival CEO opened her mouth, the air shifted. Her voice was smooth, almost casual, but every word was a dagger wrapped in silk. "So, you're really running that company?" she said, with a slow, mocking laugh that echoed through the room like a challenge. "I mean, it's impressive, sure, but are you sure you know what you're doing? This isn't some startup garage anymore." Her eyes skimmed over me, the dismissive tilt of her head speaking louder than any insult. The boardroom froze, jaws tightening, eyes darting between us. A few forced chuckles tried to break the tension, but the message was clear. I was the odd one out, the other in a game where trust and respect were currency. I met her gaze without blinking. Inside, the cold fire of indignation ignited, but outwardly I stayed composed, the calm in the storm. This wasn't the first time I'd been underestimated. Not the first time my expertise had been questioned because of the color of my skin or the way I looked. But this time, it wasn't just personal. It was strategic. I saw the ripple effect, the subtle shifts in body language from key investors, the tightening of their lips, the flash of uncertainty. They weren't just watching me. They were watching how I would respond. Because in this room, every reaction was a sign of strength or weakness. Every word could tip the scales. I let her words hang in the air for a moment, thick and heavy, then leaned forward slightly, letting my silence speak volumes. The rival CEO smirked, clearly expecting me to falter, to react emotionally. But I wasn't playing by her rules. I had a plan. This wasn't just about shutting down a snide remark. This was about showing the board, the investors, and the industry that Morgan Tech didn't just survive under pressure, it thrived. And the next move would change everything. The room was dead silent, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning and the distant city noise filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The mockery had landed like a thunderclap, but no one dared speak. Every pair of eyes locked on me, waiting for a reaction, some sign of weakness, anger, or hesitation. The weight of decades of unseen doubt bore down, yet I held my ground. I felt their collective breath held tight, like the entire future of Morgan Tech hinged on the next seconds. And in truth, it did. Around the table, Board members shifted uneasily. Some masked their discomfort with polite nods. Others' faces were etched with skepticism. The investors, whose signatures could make or break us, exchanged subtle glances, concern flickering like shadowed warnings. My heart didn't race. My mind was sharp and calculating. Years of facing dismissals, of being underestimated in rooms just like this had forged my armor. But today was different. This was not just about me. This was about every black woman who'd ever been sidelined, every underestimated leader who fought for respect in spaces designed to exclude them. I let the silence stretch a little longer, giving them time to realize that no quick rebuttal, no emotional outburst would come. Instead, what they got was the quiet confidence of someone who had mastered the art of strategic patience. The rival CEO watched, her smirk fading into a mask of impatience. She realized I wasn't the scared novice she'd hoped to humiliate. Instead, I was a threat, because beneath my calm exterior, plans were unfolding. A counterattack that wouldn't just protect Morgan Tech, but rewrite the rules for how respect is demanded in the boardroom. And though no one yet spoke, the game had changed. The stakes had never been higher. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me like the thick glass walls surrounding us. The insult hung in the air, but the real question was, how would I respond? Reacting with anger might satisfy the moment, but this was bigger than pride. This was about power, strategy, and change. Every fiber of my being urged me to speak up, to call out the disrespect loudly and visibly. But I had learned long ago that true strength wasn't in shouting. It was in the moves no one saw coming. I glanced at my team, their steady faces a reminder that this wasn't just my fight. It was a battle for Morgan Tech's future and for every underdog who ever walked into a boardroom with less than a fair chance. The rival CEO was still watching, waiting for a crack. She thrived on drama, on spectacle. But I wasn't here to entertain. I was here to win. Slowly, deliberately, I shifted my gaze to the massive screen behind her. The $2.6 billion deal projected in bold numbers and glossy charts. The promise of expansion, innovation, and market dominance. The stakes were clear. This deal was the culmination of years of sweat, sacrifice, and relentless pursuit. But if I let this moment slide, it would become a symbol of tolerance for disrespect. A message to the world that even the most accomplished black woman could be belittled without consequence. That was unacceptable. I inhaled deeply, steadying my thoughts. The boardroom wasn't a place for rash emotion. It was a chessboard, and every word was a move. With the weight of history behind me and the future ahead, I made my choice. I would not fight fire with fire. I would fight fire with precision. Because sometimes the loudest statement is silence, followed by action so decisive it leaves no room for doubt. The question was, would they be ready for what came next? The room's attention snapped back to the glowing screen where the deal's key figures danced in sleek graphs and dollar signs. $2.6 billion. Not just a number, a future rewritten. Expansion into new markets. Partnerships that would reshape entire industries. The culmination of years of innovation and relentless grit. Morgan Tech's fingerprints were already all over the technology that powered data security and AI platforms worldwide. This merger wasn't just business. It was a statement. Black-led innovation was not just possible. It was unstoppable. I watched faces around the table. Investors with portfolios spanning continents. Board members whose approval could make or break the deal. Their eyes flicked between the numbers and me, silently asking, can she deliver? I was the answer they needed and the challenge they feared. Behind me, my team sat poised, aware of the fragile balance. One wrong move, and the entire deal could unravel. But I had no intention of letting that happen. This was my moment to prove that leadership wasn't about appearances or empty boasts. It was about vision, tenacity, and strategy. As the presentation progressed, I carefully highlighted key points. Morgan Tech's projected growth, proprietary algorithms, and unmatched talent pipeline. I spoke clearly, calmly, but with the conviction of someone who'd fought through every obstacle to claim this seat. Yet, beneath the surface, I knew the undercurrent hadn't disappeared. The rival CEO's earlier mockery lingered like a shadow. Some in the room still questioned if a black woman could steer a multi-billion-dollar deal. But as I laid out the facts, the value, and the vision, I wasn't just pitching numbers. I was pitching trust. Trust in Morgan Tech, trust in me. The deal on the table was more than a contract. It was the chance to shatter ceilings and rewrite expectations. And I was ready to take it. The murmur of the room settled into a tense hush as I scanned the faces before me. Every glance, every twitch of an eyebrow, every slight nod was a silent calculation. The rival CEO's derision had left a residue of doubt, but my resolve burned quietly beneath the surface. I reminded myself, power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a measured breath, a steady gaze, a refusal to be rattled. As the lead negotiator, I had been here before. Each step I took was deliberate, each word weighted with intent. I'd spent years refining this skill, balancing empathy with steel, confidence with caution. The deal wasn't just about Morgan Tech's growth. It was a symbol of resilience. Every milestone we'd reached was a testament to breaking through systemic barriers. I cleared my throat, voice calm but commanding. This deal represents more than financial growth. It represents a shift in how innovation is recognized and valued. Morgan Tech is ready to lead this change. There was no room for doubt in my tone. The room absorbed it. Some investors shifted in their seats, reassessing their calculations. The rival CEO, caught off guard, masked her surprise with a tight smile. I could see it the moment she realized I wasn't just a participant. I was a force. Beneath the surface, my mind raced, aligning strategies and anticipating moves. I knew the power of perception, and I controlled mine. Today, I wouldn't just survive this encounter. I would master it. And when the time came, the ripples of this boardroom would echo far beyond these walls. The moment I spoke, the air thickened. The rival CEO's smug grin faltered, her confidence shaken by a calm she hadn't anticipated. It was time to shift the game. I rose slowly, commanding attention without raising my voice. Before we proceed, I want to address something that can no longer be ignored. The room grew still, every eye locked on me, waiting, some with anticipation, others with thinly veiled skepticism. I've been underestimated, I said, my tone steady, but not anymore. Today, I'm not just here to close a deal. I'm here to set a precedent. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. This $2.6 billion partnership depends on trust, respect, and integrity. And I cannot, and will not, do business where those values are questioned. A murmur rippled around the room. The rival CEO's jaw tightened, her carefully crafted facade cracking. Then, with quiet finality, I stated, therefore, am withdrawing Morgan Tech from this deal. Effective immediately. Gasps filled the room. The investors looked stunned, some even outraged. The rival CEO's expression twisted in disbelief and fury. I remained composed. This wasn't a reaction born of emotion, but a strategic move, one that reverberated far beyond the boardroom. In that moment, I transformed from the mocked underdog to the leader who controlled the fate of billions. I didn't need to shout or fight. One decisive act was enough to send a message loud and clear. Respect is non-negotiable, and when it's denied, consequences follow. The room fell into a heavy silence that seemed to stretch on endlessly. The shock of my words echoed off the walls, swallowing every whispered conversation, every hesitant breath. The rival CEO stared at me, her face pale but defiant, as if daring me to back down. But I held her gaze firmly, unwavering. Around the table, the investors were frozen, some exchanging quick, cautious glances, others pinching the bridge of their noses in frustration. A few leaned forward, their eyes filled with conflicted emotions, respect, disbelief, uncertainty. The weight of the moment pressed down on us all. For years, I had fought battles far less public, subtle, and unspoken. But here, In this room where billions hung in the balance, the unvarnished truth had finally been laid bare. The decision wasn't easy for anyone. Some saw opportunity in the upheaval, others saw risk. The silence wasn't just absence of sound. It was the charged stillness before storm. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, one of the senior investors cleared his throat, breaking the spell. His voice was low, cautious. "Ms. Morgan, your position is clear. But the ramifications—" I nodded, anticipating the resistance, the challenge. But I also knew that change was seldom comfortable. It was necessary. And sometimes, the hardest decisions were the most important. The rival CEO's lips pressed into a thin line. She sat back, defeated but unyielding. Her carefully crafted empire was cracking under the weight of my resolve. The boardroom had shifted, and with it, the power dynamics that had long favored the privileged began to tilt. I didn't celebrate in that moment. I simply prepared, because the real battle was just beginning. The tension in the room thickened as murmurs rose from investors caught between shock and calculation. Their faces were masks of professionalism, but behind their eyes flickered the raw reality. Billions of dollars now hanging in the balance, uncertain and vulnerable. Some leaned into their devices, discreetly checking market data, stock prices already twitching with the news they hadn't expected. Others whispered hurriedly to advisors, their voices hushed but urgent, weighing risk versus opportunity. The rival CEO's attempt to salvage the deal was met with polite nods, but no real conviction. She was now a spectator, her power waning as the board's confidence shifted. Across the table, I noticed a few key players exchanging glances that spoke louder than words. Support was stirring, subtle but undeniable. There was respect for the boldness it took to walk away, for the principle of demanding dignity over dollars. But there was also fear. Fear of instability. Fear of change. One seasoned investor, his silver hair catching the light, finally broke the silence. "Ms. Morgan, your stance is courageous, but it puts us at a crossroads. We must consider the impact on shareholders, the market, and the future." I met his gaze without flinching. The future we build has to be one where respect isn't negotiable. Without that foundation, wealth means nothing. His eyes softened slightly. The room seemed to hold its breath. In that moment, I felt the invisible walls cracking, the old guard confronting the inevitability of transformation. Though the deal was collapsing, a new dynamic was emerging, one where integrity was the currency that could no longer be ignored. As the boardroom buzzed with cautious conversations, I prepared for what lay ahead. The fight for change was far from over, but this moment marked the beginning. The atmosphere cracked like electricity. The carefully curated calm of the meeting dissolved into controlled chaos. Voices rose, some sharp, some pleading, as board members scrambled to respond to the seismic shift that just shook their carefully constructed world. "Reconsider," some urged, their words laced with desperation and calculation. "This deal can't fall apart now." Others, however, stood firmly behind the principle I had laid bare, rallying for respect over reckless profit. The rival CEO's composure faltered. Her eyes darted around, seeking allies, but many had turned away. The power she once wielded now felt fragile, exposed under the scrutiny of those who demanded more than just financial gains. Investors split into factions, those clinging to the familiar and those ready to embrace a new era. Amidst the turmoil, my team remained calm, grounding me with quiet nods and steady presence. I could feel the pulse of the room accelerating, each heartbeat a reminder that this was more than business. It was a reckoning. Board members debated heatedly, some arguing for damage control, others pushing for transparency and reform. The rival CEO attempted a forceful rebuttal, but the momentum had shifted irreversibly. Her words were met with skepticism, questions, and cold stares. I seized the moment. "This isn't about winning or losing," I said clearly. "It's about setting a precedent for how business should be conducted, with integrity, respect, and accountability." The room fell silent again, the weight of that truth settling like dust after a storm. The chaos had shown a fracture in the old order, and from that fracture, a chance for renewal emerged. The rival CEO's eyes burned with a sudden, fierce determination. She wasn't going down without a fight. Rising from her chair, her voice cut sharply through the tense air. You think you could just walk away from this? You're making a grave mistake, not just for yourself, but for everyone involved. Her words echoed with the threat of power wielded recklessly. She launched into a rapid-fire barrage of accusations, questioning my leadership, my company's readiness, even the validity of the deal itself. The room shifted uncomfortably under the weight of her words. But I had anticipated this storm. I met her gaze steadily, unflinching. My decision wasn't impulsive. It's rooted in values that can't be compromised. Morgan Tech stands for more than profits. It stands for respect and fairness. The boardroom buzzed with murmurs, some skeptical, some nodding quietly. The rival CEO's retaliation was a desperate grasp to regain control, but her words now sounded hollow, overshadowed by the unwavering conviction I carried. She paced the room, trying to rally support, but even her closest allies began to waver. The power dynamics were shifting, and the walls she had built to protect herself were cracking. I could see the frustration in her eyes, the recognition that her tactics no longer held the sway they once did. This wasn't just a personal battle. It was a reckoning for an industry long overdue. Her attempt to intimidate and undermine had only strengthened my resolve and the board's growing trust in me. In the silent exchanges and cautious glances, the truth was clear. The tides were turning. As the rival CEO struggled to regain her footing, I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a carefully prepared dossier. Documents that would shift the narrative from empty words to undeniable truth. The room fell into attentive silence as I laid the folder on the table and opened it slowly, deliberately. Inside were emails, contracts, and internal memos, proof of unethical decisions and past betrayals orchestrated by the rival CEO herself. It was a history of calculated manipulation, favoritism, and decisions that had cost partners millions behind closed doors. I spoke clearly, each word cutting through the tension like a blade. Before we proceed any further, I want the board to see the full picture, because respect is built on truth and accountability. One by one, I summarized key points, letting the evidence speak for itself. Faces around the room shifted, some pale with shock, others narrowing their eyes in disbelief. This wasn't just a battle of words anymore. It was an exposure of a pattern of behavior that could no longer be ignored. The rival CEO's confident facade crumbled under the weight of the facts. Her attempts to deflect had failed. Investors exchanged whispers, recalculating risks, realizing the depth of the crisis before them. With the room now fully engaged, I leaned back, the dossier closed, but the impact still rippling through the air. This evidence sealed the deal. Not the one on the table, but the one that would redefine leadership, integrity, and respect. The boardroom had become more than a negotiation room. It was a courtroom of truth, and I was ready to see justice served. The air shifted, heavy with the weight of inevitable change. As the truth settled into every corner of the room, the once promising $2.6 billion deal began to unravel, not with a bang, but a resolute whisper of finality. Board members exchanged solemn looks, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others silently accepting the consequence of broken trust. The rival CEO sat, shoulders slumped, her reign momentarily shattered. I watched quietly as murmurs turned into somber conversations. The corporate dance paused by a moment of clarity no one could deny. The deal wasn't just contracts and figures anymore. It had become a symbol, a reckoning for an industry resistant to change, and a testament to the power of standing firm on principle. The lead investor finally spoke, voice steady but tinged with regret. Given these revelations and the withdrawal from Morgan Tech, the deal is effectively dead. A collective nod followed, the end spelled out in unanimous understanding. Yet, Beneath the surface, a new energy began to build, one fueled not by profit, but by integrity. As the meeting adjourned, the room cleared quickly, whispers trailing behind like shadows. I gathered my belongings calmly, the weight of victory settling gently upon me. This moment wasn't about celebration, it was about setting a precedent, to demand respect in spaces where it had been historically withheld, to make clear that progress comes with accountability. As I stepped out of the boardroom, cameras flashed in the hallways. Journalists who had somehow caught wind of the unfolding drama, hungry for the story behind the headlines. The collapse of a $2.6 billion deal wasn't just news. It was a statement, and I was ready to own every part of it. No sooner had I stepped out of the boardroom than the storm erupted. Cameras flashed, reporters swarmed, and questions flew like arrows. Headlines exploded across screens and newsstands. CEO walks away from $2.6 billion deal over disrespect. Boardroom drama rocks tech world. Morgan Tech Celeste Morgan demands respect, shakes industry. Social media ignited with a frenzy of opinions. Supporters lauding the stand I took, critics questioning the consequences, and pundits debating the future of leadership in corporate America. For me, the media storm was just another battlefield. I carefully crafted my message, knowing every word would be dissected, every gesture analyzed. It wasn't about spectacle or revenge. It was about shining a light on a culture too long mired in prejudice and complacency. In interviews, I spoke with measured grace, emphasizing the importance of integrity, respect, and accountability in business. The narrative quickly shifted from scandal to conversation, sparking discussions across boardrooms, newsrooms, and living rooms. Articles and opinion pieces debated not only the deal's collapse, but the deeper issues it exposed. The industry was forced to confront uncomfortable truths about diversity, leadership, and the cost of silence. As the media spotlight intensified, messages of support poured in from fellow CEOs, business leaders, and advocates for change. Behind the scenes, my team managed the flood of inquiries, ensuring our focus remained on what truly mattered: Morgan Tech's vision and the message our actions sent. The media frenzy wasn't an obstacle. It was a catalyst, a sign that the moment had arrived for transformation. And I was at the center of it all. The spotlight was intense, but my voice remained steady as I addressed the world. Cameras zoomed in, microphones captured every word, but this wasn't about me. It was about a larger truth. I'm not here to be angry, I began, eyes meeting the lens with unwavering clarity. I am here to speak for every person who has ever been underestimated, dismissed, or made to feel less because of who they are. The words felt like a release, not just for me, but for everyone watching, feeling the weight of exclusion and bias. This was never just a business deal, I continued. It was a test of respect, integrity, and fairness. Morgan Tech stands for innovation, yes, but also for dignity. I spoke about the importance of creating spaces where diversity isn't a checkbox, but a foundation, where leadership is measured by vision, not by outdated stereotypes. The statement resonated far beyond the corporate world. Messages poured in from people inspired by the courage to stand firm. The media replayed my words, dissected them, debated them, but the core message was clear. Respect is not negotiable, and progress requires courage. As I finished, I looked away from the cameras, knowing the journey ahead would be long and challenging. But this moment, this statement, was the first step toward a new era, and I was ready to lead it. In the wake of the storm, a surprising force emerged: the rallying of allies. Business leaders, industry veterans, and influential voices began to speak out, their support a powerful counterbalance to the backlash. Messages flooded in from CEOs who understood the importance of standing for more than just profits. They applauded the courage it took to prioritize dignity over dollars and joined the chorus demanding change. Board members from other companies reached out privately, sharing stories of their own struggles and expressing solidarity. Advocacy groups amplified the message, turning a corporate battle into a movement for equality and respect. Even some investors who had once hesitated now voiced public support, recognizing that leadership required integrity, not just financial gain. This network of support grew stronger with each passing day, creating momentum that no one could ignore. With allies by my side, the fight for transformation was no longer solitary. It became a shared mission. Together, we pushed for accountability, transparency, and policies that protected those too often overlooked. The business world was beginning to wake up, the old rules challenged, the barriers slowly dismantling. And at the center of this awakening was a united front, bound by the belief that respect is the foundation of true success. The support wasn't just encouraging, it was a signal that the future was shifting. And that future was one I was determined to help build. The ripple effects spread far beyond our boardroom. The industry, once comfortable in its old ways, now faced a reckoning. Conversations ignited in corporate offices, conference halls, and private meetings worldwide. Whispers of Celeste Morgan turned into calls for cultural audits, policy reviews, and renewed commitments to diversity. Trade journals published in-depth analyses, not just about the deal, but about the systemic biases that had allowed disrespect to fester in plain sight. Executives scrambled to reassess their leadership training programs, pledging to foster environments where every voice mattered. Employees and companies across sectors shared their own stories of marginalization, emboldened by the public stance we'd taken. It became clear this was not an isolated incident. It was a mirror held up to an industry that had long ignored its fractures. Pressure mounted on boards and CEOs to act, to prove that respect was more than rhetoric. Some resisted, clinging to outdated hierarchies. Others embraced change, recognizing it as essential for growth. For Morgan Tech, this fallout was both a challenge and an opportunity to lead by example, to turn disruption into progress. The path ahead was complex, fraught with resistance, but illuminated by a growing call for justice and equity. This was the new reality, one shaped by courage, clarity, and a refusal to settle for less. After the storm had settled and the spotlight dimmed, I found a quiet moment alone to reflect. The weight of the confrontation pressed heavily, not as a burden, but as a reminder of the path I traveled. I thought back to every boardroom where my presence had been questioned, every achievement overshadowed by prejudice, every moment I had to prove myself twice over. The mockery wasn't just about that single insult in the room. It was the echo of countless dismissals, the silent barriers that had shaped my journey. But it was also a testament to resilience, the fire that had fueled my rise and refusal to be invisible. I allowed myself to feel the exhaustion, the emotional toll of fighting battles not just against competitors, but against ingrained biases. Yet, beneath that fatigue lay a deep sense of purpose. This was bigger than me. It was about changing the narrative for those who would come after, opening doors that had been stubbornly closed. I thought about my team, my family, and the countless individuals whose hopes and struggles intertwined with this moment. The fight for respect and recognition was ongoing, but I was ready to lead it with unwavering clarity. This moment wasn't the end. It was a pivot point, a call to action for all who believed that leadership transcends appearances. As I looked ahead, I knew the journey would demand strength, strategy, and steadfastness. But I was no stranger to challenge, and I would not walk away. In the aftermath of the upheaval, new doors began to open, unexpected, powerful, and promising. Industry leaders who had once remained silent now sought collaboration, recognizing that Morgan Tech's bold stance had ignited a shift not just in business, but in culture. Invitations arrived to speak at global forums, to join advisory boards, and to shape policies that would influence the future of tech and leadership. These opportunities weren't just accolades, they were platforms for change. I embraced each one with purpose, knowing that influence came with responsibility. But beyond the spotlight, quieter possibilities emerged. Strategic partnerships blossomed with companies ready to align their values with ours. Talent recruitment surged, drawing professionals inspired by a company that stood unwaveringly for integrity. Investors, too, realigned their focus, seeing in Morgan Tech not just financial promise, but leadership grounded in principle. The ripple effect extended beyond corporate walls. Community organizations reached out, eager to build bridges and foster pathways for underrepresented voices. This new chapter was filled with potential, but required careful navigation. Each opportunity demanded strategic thinking and clarity of mission. I was determined to lead Morgan Tech not just as a business success story, but as a catalyst for enduring transformation. The journey ahead was as exciting as it was daunting. But with every new door, the message was clear. Change was not just possible, it was underway. The dust had settled, but the game was far from over. With new opportunities came new responsibilities and a need for calculated moves. I gathered my leadership team, each member a pillar of expertise and vision. Together, we mapped out a strategy not just to recover, but to accelerate Morgan Tech's growth and influence. Every decision was intentional, forging alliances that aligned with our values, investing in innovations that pushed boundaries, and strengthening internal culture to reflect the inclusivity we championed. We revisited our partnerships, ensuring that every collaboration upheld the standards of respect and equity that had become non-negotiable. The fallout from the boardroom clash had made us a symbol, but symbols require substance. I prioritized transparency, regularly communicating with stakeholders to build trust and demonstrate our commitment to change. Simultaneously, I leveraged the heightened visibility to attract top talent and fresh capital, turning adversity into advantage. Behind the scenes, we implemented programs to support diversity at all levels, recognizing that leadership must reflect the communities we serve. Each move was a calculated step to solidify Morgan Tech's position, not just as a market leader, but as a beacon for ethical business. The stakes were higher, but so was our resolve. This wasn't just recovery, it was reinvention, and I was determined that Morgan Tech's next chapter would be defined not by crisis, but by courage and conviction. The shockwaves of the confrontation reached beyond Morgan Tech, shaking the very foundations of partner companies and boardrooms worldwide. Change was no longer optional, it was demanded. Executives across industries began reassessing their corporate cultures and governance structures. Diversity and inclusion initiatives, once sidelined, surged to the forefront of agendas. Stricter policies were implemented to prevent discrimination, with mandatory training programs focusing on unconscious bias and respectful leadership. Board invited external consultants to audit their cultures, and whistleblower protections were strengthened to ensure voices like mine could no longer be ignored. Some resisted, clinging to outdated traditions, but the tide was unmistakable. Companies recognized that fostering equity wasn't just moral, it was critical for innovation, talent retention, and reputation. Morgan Tech's bold stand became a blueprint, a rallying cry for accountability and transformation. Through partnerships and advisory roles, I helped shape new standards for governance, ones that prioritized integrity alongside profitability. The boardrooms of old were evolving into spaces where every leader, regardless of background, could thrive. The ripple effect of that day's confrontation extended far beyond the immediate fallout. It was a turning point, a moment when silence was broken and systemic change began. And as I watched these reforms take root, I knew the future was brighter, and more just because of it. The platform that once felt like a battlefield had transformed into a stage for advocacy. Invitations poured in to share my story and insights at conferences, leadership summits, and industry panels around the world. Standing before audiences, I spoke not just as a CEO, but as a voice for those who had long been overlooked. Each speech was crafted to inspire, to challenge norms, and encourage courage. I shared the realities of facing bias head-on, the power of strategic resilience, and the necessity of demanding respect without apology. The responses were overwhelming. From young professionals seeking guidance to seasoned leaders pledging change, the impact was tangible. Media coverage amplified the message, turning it into a global conversation about equity in leadership and business. Behind the scenes, I worked with advocacy groups and nonprofits to develop programs aimed at empowering underrepresented communities. These partnerships fueled initiatives for mentorship, education, and career advancement. Through public speaking and grassroots work, I sought to bridge the gap between corporate success and social responsibility. The journey from a silent boardroom confrontation to a beacon of advocacy was profound. It reminded me that true leadership extends beyond the balance sheet. It shapes culture, society, and the future. And as the applause echoed, I knew this was only the beginning of a movement far greater than any single deal or moment. The fallout wasn't limited to the boardroom. The rival CEO, once a titan of industry, now found her influence waning. Whispers of the confrontation spread through corporate circles, and with them came scrutiny. Investors questioned her leadership style, partners reconsidered alliances, and the media probed into past decisions. Her attempts to rebuild credibility were met with skepticism. The veneer of power she'd carefully crafted cracked under the weight of mounting criticism. Internal audits revealed patterns of favoritism and misconduct that echoed the evidence I presented. Key stakeholders pushed for leadership changes, fearing that her presence endangered their own futures. Meanwhile, Morgan Tech's rise only accelerated, fueled by a growing reputation for integrity and visionary leadership. The rival CEO's decline served as a stark reminder. Respect and accountability were now non-negotiable. In boardrooms and beyond, the balance of power had shifted. The old guard was making way for a new era, one where true leadership could no longer be undermined by prejudice or arrogance. Her story became a cautionary tale, a testament to the cost of underestimating those who refuse to be silenced. And as I moved forward, I carried with me the lessons of resilience and the unwavering belief that change was inevitable. As the dust settled on the boardroom battle that had captured global attention, I knew the work was far from over, but a legacy had been forged. This wasn't just about a canceled deal or a single confrontation. It was about shifting the landscape of leadership itself. Morgan Tech stood stronger, not just because of market success, but because we had dared to demand respect and integrity in a world that often resisted both. I saw the faces of the young leaders who reached out, inspired by the stand we took, those who now believed that their voices mattered, regardless of background. The industry's old guard was yielding to new standards built on equity, courage, and accountability. Boards restructured, policies reformed, and cultures transformed. And while challenges remained, the path forward was clearer than ever. I didn't need accolades or headlines to affirm this legacy. It was in every conversation sparked, every barrier broken, and every step taken toward a more just future. As I looked ahead, the responsibility settled with renewed clarity. To lead not just a company, but a movement, to ensure that no one else would face the silence I once endured. The story wasn't about me alone, it was about all of us. And in that shared journey, a new era of leadership was born.